Sometime between midnight and 4 a.m. on April 16th, one of America's most powerful warships moved 400 miles from its position in the Arabian Sea. No announcement, no press briefing, no explanation from the Pentagon, no statement from Central Command. The ship was in one place when the sun went down, and it was somewhere completely different when the sun came up. By 6 a.m., Iran already knew, and by 9 a.m., Iran had already moved. And the thing Iran did in those 3 hours, the specific, deliberate, coordinated set of actions it took the moment it detected that ship was gone, is the story that nobody in Washington is connecting to the carrier movement publicly. By the time this video is over, you are going to understand why that overnight repositioning was either the most calculated strategic decision of this entire war or the most consequential mistake, and why the answer to that question determines everything that happens before the end of this month. Let us start with what this carrier was actually doing and why its specific position in the Arabian Sea mattered more than almost any other single factor in this war. The USS Harry S. Truman is a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. It is not just a ship, it is a floating airbase carrying roughly 70 aircraft, including F/A-18 Super Hornets, capable of striking targets anywhere inside Iran within minutes of launch. It travels with a strike group, 2 guided missile cruisers, 3 destroyers, an attack submarine running silent underneath, and a supply ship keeping the whole formation operational indefinitely at sea. When the Truman is in a specific position in the Arabian Sea, its aircraft can reach Tehran in under 25 minutes. That 25-minute window is not just a military fact, it is a psychological fact. It is the reason Iranian commanders have to think twice before ordering any significant military action. The carrier does not have to fire a single weapon to change Iranian behavior. It just has to be there. Its presence is the threat. Its position is the message. For 31 consecutive days, the Truman had been holding a position roughly 200 miles southeast of the Strait of Hormuz, close enough to strike, far enough to avoid Iran's coastal missile batteries. The position was not random. It was calculated to sit inside the window, where American aircraft could respond to any Iranian escalation within minutes, while remaining outside the effective range of Iran's most dangerous anti-ship missiles. That position was the cork in the bottle. As long as the Truman held it, Iran's options were constrained. Every Iranian military commander woke up every morning knowing that if they moved against American assets, American aircraft were 25 minutes away. On the night of April 15th, the Truman moved. It traveled approximately 400 miles northeast, repositioning into the northern Arabian Sea, closer to the Pakistani coastline. The official reason given when the Pentagon eventually acknowledged the movement 3 days later was routine repositioning for resupply operations. That explanation has 3 problems. First, carrier strike groups do not travel 400 miles for resupply. Resupply ships come to the carrier. That is literally what they are built to do. Second, the movement took the Truman outside its established 25-minute strike window over Tehran. From its new position, Iranian targets that were previously reachable in under half an hour now require significantly longer flight times, enough time for Iranian air defenses to activate, track, and respond. Third, and this is the detail that the Pentagon's explanation cannot account for, Iran responded within 3 hours. Not within 3 days. Not after a press conference. Within 3 hours of the Truman's repositioning being detectable by Iranian surveillance systems, Iran had already begun moving assets of its own. That is not a coincidence. That is Iran watching and waiting for exactly this moment. Now let me explain how Iran watches, because this is the part of the story that most Western coverage treats as a mystery, when it is actually very well understood by anyone willing to look at what Iran has built over the last 4 decades. Iran cannot match American satellite technology. It does not have the constellation of surveillance satellites that the United States uses to watch every corner of the planet in real time. What Iran has done instead is build a layered ground-based and sea-based observation network, specifically designed to track American naval movements in the waters it cares about most. Iran operates a series of radar installations along its southern coastline overlooking the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. It runs a network of small, fast patrol boats that operate far out into the Arabian Sea under the cover of fishing activity, equipped with sensors and communication equipment. It has developed relationships with commercial ship tracking services, whose publicly available data Iran monitors constantly. And it has invested heavily in signals intelligence, the ability to detect and analyze the electronic emissions of American naval vessels even when those vessels are trying to be quiet. A carrier strike group moving 400 miles through open ocean generates an enormous electronic signature. Radar pulses, communication traffic, aircraft transponder signals, the acoustic signature of the carrier's propulsion system detectable by underwater sensors. Iran has spent 40 years building the specific capability to detect exactly this kind of movement. The idea that the Truman could reposition 400 miles overnight without Iran knowing is not credible to anyone who has studied what Iran's surveillance network actually looks like. Iran knew. The only question is what it did with that knowledge. Here is what Iran did. Within 3 hours of the Truman's repositioning becoming detectable, Iranian Revolutionary Guard naval units in the northern Gulf began moving. Small fast boats that had been sitting in port for days suddenly became active. A formation of Iranian vessels moved toward the center of the Strait of Hormuz and took up positions that had been unoccupied for the previous 2 weeks. Simultaneously, Iranian coastal missile battery crews in the Qeshm Island area, which sits directly inside the strait, were placed on elevated readiness. These are not offensive moves in isolation. They are positioning moves. Iran was filling the space that the Truman's repositioning had opened. Every mile the Truman moved away from its established position was a mile of reduced deterrence. And Iran moved to occupy that reduced deterrence the moment it appeared. But the naval moves were only the first layer of what Iran did that morning. At 11 a.m. Tehran time, approximately 5 hours after the Truman's movement became detectable, Iran's state media published a statement from a Revolutionary Guard commander. The statement was brief and carefully worded. It said that Iranian forces had conducted a successful exercise demonstrating the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz within 2 hours of a command being issued. It did not mention the Truman. It did not mention the repositioning. It did not need to. Every intelligence analyst in Washington reading that statement at 7 a.m. Eastern Time understood exactly what it was responding to. Iran was telling the United States in public language that could not be called a provocation. We noticed, we moved, and we want you to know we moved. That is a message. Messages delivered that precisely and that quickly do not come from a disorganized military running on instinct. They come from a command structure that had a prepared response sitting in a drawer waiting for the carrier to move. And then, 2 hours after that statement, oil markets moved. Brent crude, which is the global benchmark that determines what refineries around the world pay for oil, jumped $4.20 in under 90 minutes. That is not a massive single-day move, but it is a significant intraday spike, and the timing is the story. It happened at the exact moment that Iranian state media's statement about closing the strait within 2 hours was being processed by oil trading desks in London, Singapore, and New York. The traders did not know about the Truman's repositioning. They did not have access to the surveillance analysis that American intelligence was processing simultaneously. What they had was an Iranian commander publicly stating that the strait could be closed in 2 hours, and they priced that statement immediately. Every dollar that Brent crude moved that morning is a direct line from an overnight carrier repositioning that was never announced, through an Iranian response that was never officially connected to that repositioning, to the price you paid at the pump the following week. This is how the war reaches your kitchen table without ever making the evening news as a single connected story. The carrier moves. Iran notices. Iran signals. Markets react. Your gas bill goes up. 4 steps, invisible to anyone watching only one piece of the chain. I want to pause here for a moment and make sure the scale of what I just described is fully clear. The average American family is now spending an estimated $340 more per month on energy and transportation costs compared to February of this year. That is $340 that is not going to savings, not going to groceries, not going to a child's college fund or a medical bill or a car repair. $340 a month extracted from ordinary American households by a chain of events that begins with a warship moving overnight in a sea most Americans could not find on a map. The people making decisions about where that carrier sits are not paying that $340. The analysts arguing in situation rooms about deterrence positioning and strike windows are not paying that $340. You are. Every time a carrier moves out of position and Iran fills the gap, and oil traders price the risk and refineries pass the cost down the chain, the bill lands in the same place. At the kitchen table of someone who had nothing to do with any of it. Now, here is the historical pattern, because this has happened before, and the last time it happened, the consequences were severe enough that the military has supposedly studied it extensively. In August of 1990, in the days immediately before Iraq invaded Kuwait, the United States had significant naval assets in the Persian Gulf. American intelligence had warning indicators that Iraq was preparing to move. Analysts debated the signals. A decision was made to reposition certain assets for what was described internally as precautionary reasons. Within 48 hours of that repositioning, Saddam Hussein ordered his forces across the Kuwaiti border. Iraqi military commanders later confirmed in post-war interviews that the American repositioning had been interpreted in Baghdad as a signal that the United States would not respond militarily to an Iraqi move. The repositioning, meant to reduce risk, had accidentally communicated permission. The Gulf War that followed cost the United States over $100 billion and the lives of nearly 400 American service members. And it began, in part, because a movement of American military assets was read by an adversary as an opening. Iran has studied that episode in detail. Iran's military academies teach it. Iran's strategic planners have gamed out every variation of it for decades. The lesson Iran took from 1990 is simple and has never changed. When American assets reposition, assess immediately whether it signals retreat, resupply, or redeployment. Then move before Washington can explain what it actually meant. Here is what makes this specific repositioning different from every previous one in this war, and this is the part that the morning shows are not connecting. The Truman's new position, 400 miles northeast near the Pakistani coastline, places it in waters that are significantly closer to Chinese naval assets currently operating in the northern Arabian Sea. We covered those 3 Chinese warships in a previous video. The Type 052D destroyer, the Type 054A frigate, and the replenishment vessel sitting at the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz. The Truman's repositioning does not move it away from Iran and towards safety. It moves it away from Iran and toward a position where American and Chinese naval assets are operating in closer proximity than at any previous point in this war. That is not a resupply move. Resupply moves take you away from complexity, not toward it. Something else drove this repositioning. And the 2 most plausible explanations are the ones that Washington is least willing to say out loud. Explanation 1. Iran's coastal missile threat had become credible enough that keeping the Truman in its established position was no longer acceptable to American commanders. The anti-ship missile systems Iran has been quietly activating in the Qeshm Island area and along the Makran coast have a range that overlaps with the Truman's previous position. If American intelligence assessed that Iran had locked firing solutions on the carrier's established location, moving the carrier was not a strategic choice. It was a forced move, a retreat dressed up as a repositioning. Explanation 2. The Truman moved to create space for a diplomatic signal. A carrier pulling back from a 25-minute strike window is, in the language of military signaling, a de-escalatory gesture. It says we are reducing our immediate offensive capability as a gesture toward negotiation. If back-channel talks between Washington and Tehran are happening at a level below what is being reported publicly, a carrier repositioning could be the physical expression of a diplomatic offer that has not yet been announced. Both explanations have evidence supporting them. Both have evidence complicating them, and the fact that Washington has given neither explanation, choosing instead the unconvincing resupply story, suggests that the truth is one of those 2 things, and officials have decided that neither can be said publicly without costing them something significant. Here is the question I want you to sit with, and I want to see your answer in the comments, because people watching this are going to land in very different places, and that argument is worth having out loud. The carrier moved 400 miles overnight. Iran responded within 3 hours. Oil prices moved within 5 hours. The Pentagon said it was routine resupply and has not addressed the Iranian response. Do you think the Truman moved because American commanders made a deliberate strategic choice, a planned repositioning with a purpose Washington is not yet ready to explain publicly? Or do you think Iran's coastal missile threat had become real enough that the carrier had to move, and the resupply story is Washington covering a forced retreat with a logistical explanation? Strategic choice or forced retreat? Drop it in the comments. When someone writes the opposite of what you chose, tell them exactly why they are wrong. Because the answer to that question is the answer to what the next 2 weeks of this war actually look like. Here is where things stand right now, and why the next move matters more than any move that has come before it. The Truman is in its new position. Iran has filled the space it vacated. The Strait has Iranian patrol boats in positions they did not occupy 3 weeks ago. Iranian coastal missile batteries are on elevated readiness. Chinese warships are operating in the same general body of water as the repositioned American carrier. The ceasefire clock is running. And somewhere in the Arabian Sea, the Truman's 70 aircraft are sitting on the deck waiting for orders that have not come. The carrier did not leave the region. It did not go home. It moved 400 miles and stopped, which means whatever drove the move, Washington still intends to use it. The question is whether the window it was designed to hold is still open from its new position, or whether Iran has already moved enough assets into the gap to make that window significantly harder to use than it was 72 hours ago. Military analysts who track these positions closely are looking at the current map and describing what they see as the most complex and dangerous naval geometry of this entire war. 3 national navies operating in overlapping proximity with no communication framework between them, a ceasefire that is days from expiring, and an Iranian military that has now demonstrated twice in this conflict that it moves within hours of detecting any change in American positioning. One carrier moved 400 miles. Iran noticed before Washington said a word. Iran moved before Washington could explain. And the world your gas bill lives in got a little more expensive and a little more fragile before most people finished their morning coffee. The next movement, whether it is the Truman returning to its established position, Iran pressing further into the space it has occupied, or something none of the analysts are currently modeling, is going to happen faster than this war has moved before. And when it does, you will know exactly what to look for. We have been tracking the naval geometry of this war since the first week. The video that explains exactly how Iran's coastal missile network works, why the Makran coast changes the entire calculation for American carrier positioning, and what the Truman's new location tells us about where Washington thinks this war goes next, is the one you should watch immediately after this. Everything you just heard about that overnight move makes a completely different kind of sense once you understand what Iran has been building along that coastline for the last 6 years. Watch it next.